that see the thickest cloud and a bit of showery rain at times. But I say, for most, it's all about the strong sunshine with temperatures across northern Britain, high teens, low 20s. Further south, mid to even high 20s across the southeast. The coasts will be cooler, and it'll be cooler with a patchy rain in the northwest. But ticking up day on day, so by Thursday and into Friday in particular, we are likely to see temperatures high 20s, low, even across the southeast on Friday, maybe even the mid-30s. The sun is very strong at the moment, so make sure you put the sunscreen on. Increasing chance of a shower by the weekend.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Two controversial stories have splashed the front pages today. The new proposals to override parts of the Northern Irish Protocol and the first flight to Rwanda, which is due to leave tonight. We'll bring you the latest on both. And are you affected by the travel chaos this summer? Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Haigh will tell us what's going on and how it can be resolved. Plus, fire and rehire tactics, falling wages, and my Real Me interview with Conservative Mayor for the West Midlands, Andy Street. After the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Scotland's First Minister says there's an indisputable mandate for a second referendum on Scotland's independence from the United Kingdom. Speaking in Edinburgh, Nicola Sturgeon said it would allow for a wealthier, fairer and more resilient nation, adding, people in her country are suffering from many implications of a Brexit they did not vote for. Scotland previously held a referendum in 2014 on the issue, where 55% of the country voted against independence. But Ms Sturgeon says the country is more prepared now than it was then.
After everything that has happened, Brexit, COVID, Boris Johnson, it is time to set out a different and better vision. It is time to talk about making Scotland wealthier and fairer. It is time to talk about independence and then to make the choice.
The Prime Minister has defended government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda after criticism from religious leaders. The Archbishops of Canterbury and York have called the measures immoral and say they shamed Britain. After legal challenges yesterday, up to 11 people now are expected to be on the first flight today. At least 3 further appeals from migrants scheduled on board will be brought forward. The Foreign Secretary says those who aren't on this flight will be on another one. Boris Johnson says the policy will protect migrants.
We are not going to be in any way deterred or abashed by some of the criticism that is being directed upon this policy, some of it from slightly unexpected quarters. The objective is to ensure that we make that clear distinction that I think everybody can see is fair and reasonable between legal immigration to this country by safe and legal routes and distinguishing that from dangerous and illegal cross-channel migration.
The Labour Party opposed the policy in Parliament, and the Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell told GB News the scheme is unworkable, it's too expensive and it's not very British.
There's a huge backlog at the moment, which is partly why people are coming to this country, are here for years waiting for applications to be processed. So those that don't have a right to stay in this country aren't being sent back. We wouldn't be cutting the National Crime Agency budget by 20%, the very agency that is there to tackle these smuggling gangs. And we would make it illegal for these gangs to advertise their wares, essentially, on social media.
The Foreign Secretary says the EU has absolutely no reason to retaliate against government plans to override the Northern Ireland Protocol. Claims the new rules will make it easier for goods to travel there from Great Britain. Liz Truss told GB News the important thing is to restore the Good Friday Agreement.
We do need to resolve these issues, but we're doing it in a way that doesn't harm the European Union. We're still making sure the single market is protected. We're still making sure north-south trade is protected. So there really is no reason for a negative reaction from the EU from what we're doing.
The SNP MP, Patrick Grady, faces a 2-month suspension for breaching Parliament's sexual misconduct policy. He's accused of an unwanted sexual advance to a junior staff member in a pub in 2016. The independent expert panel, which is a parliamentary watchdog, says his behaviour marked a significant breach of the safeguarding policies, but recommended a short suspension. More than 1,000 patients a day were spending 12 hours or longer in A&E in England last year. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine, who used Freedom of Information requests to gather the information, described the numbers as alarming. They say the NHS doesn't have enough staff to provide necessary services and that patient safety has never been at greater risk. The number of UK workers on payroll rose by 90,000 between April and May to 29.6 million. But wages have fallen by 4.5%. That's the biggest drop in more than 2 decades. Data from the ONS shows that while employment is rising, it remains below pre-pandemic levels. Thousands more railway workers are to be balloted for industrial action, threatening to cause even more travel disruption for passengers this summer. It's the Transport Salaried Staffs Association that served notice to ballot more than 6,000 staff at Network Rail. It's in a dispute over pay, conditions and job security. It's the same dispute that's behind the RMT and ASLEF national rail strikes planned for later this month and July. This is GB News. We'll have more as it happens. Now let's head back to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, as Britain prepares to suspend swathes of the Northern Irish Protocol, the EU is already threatening legal action. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, will fill us in. And as the first flight taking illegal migrants is set to take off to Rwanda, legal challenges are continuing. Will anyone be on it by the time it leaves? Planes, trains and automobiles. However you travel these days, it's getting harder, with strikes on the trains, staff shortages at airports and petrol hitting £100 for a tank. I'll discuss that with Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Haigh. And I'll talk with the Labour MP Tanda C about the use of fire and rehire tactics. He wants to practice banned. We'll report on 40 years since the end of the Falklands War. And my Real Me interview is with Andy Street, the Conservative Mayor for the West Midlands and former boss of John Lewis. He's openly gay, but says he didn't realise he was till he was about 30. Today, the government is unpopular with the EU over the protocol, with many who want to stop illegal migrants being sent to Rwanda. Joining us is our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's down at Westminster for us. Darren, the first flight taking asylum seekers to Rwanda will take off today. People who are not removed on Tuesday will be on subsequent flights. That's what the Foreign Secretary told GB News Breakfast this morning. Is it that simple?
Well, in many ways, it's not. No, Gloria, is the frank answer to that question, because we had expected dozens of asylum seekers or migrants to be on this flight today. That simply is not now going to happen. There might be only 7. And this is on a chartered plane, by the way. This plane, this is not a commercial flight. This is a plane the government has specifically put on for these migrants. And even that number 7 could get reduced even further, because there are some appeals to go through the system. There is always the possibility that in the end the flight may not take off at all, though the government is insistent it will. But you're right, Liz Truss again and again this morning repeating that this is all about sending a signal. This is not necessarily about the number of people on this flight today, but it's about the intention of the government, and that those numbers will increase significantly by the end of the year, though she was unable to give a figure of what we may well be seeing by the end of the year. But you're right that this is proving politically difficult for the government in many regards, some within his own party, certainly the opposition, and indeed the Church of England, along it seems with Prince Charles, have condemned this policy. Archbishops writing in the Times today saying that it was immoral and sending the wrong signal by Britain abroad. But I think also for the government, while I say this is politically tricky in some ways, I think it's also politically expedient for them. Undoubtedly this policy is popular with large sections of the British population, and I think the government feel pretty comfortable with the fact that they're facing lots of legal challenges, not least of all because it means that they get to talk about it more, and it reminds people that the policy is taking place. Whether it's effective or not in acting as a deterrent, well, in the worst of all cliches, only time will tell.
And moving on to another controversial story, another big story today, the European Union threatening to take legal action against the UK over the proposals to unilaterally change the Northern Ireland Protocol. As briefly as you can, Darren, where does this end up?
Well, it looks like it could well end up in the courts. I don't think we're at the prospect here of a trade war yet. It's clear Britain doesn't want a trade war, but it's also clear I think the EU don't want one, given the fact that their economies are under pressure and there is a war in Ukraine. But the EU will have to be seen to at least react to all of this, and it is possible that we could end up in the courts. There's talk about legal infringement starting pretty soon. But this is only proposed legislation. Let's not forget, Gloria, it's got an awful long way to get through this place behind me. Lots of Tory MPs are pretty uncomfortable with it. Many members of the House of Lords are too. So expect many more battles ahead for this in regards to the government trying to get this through. The Brexit debates and arguments seem never-ending. That certainly seems the case again today.
Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, thanks so much for the update. Thank you. During the pandemic, we couldn't travel much. Now, at last, we can. But will we be able to, and is it worth it? There's a national rail strike next week. Chaos continues at the airports for those hoping to head abroad. What has gone wrong? Well, to discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined by Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary and Labour MP for Sheffield Heeley. Louise Haigh, good to see you.
Hi, Gloria.
The Labour Party have secured this debate in Parliament today on the passport chaos. During COVID, lots of people put off applying for passports, and now that travel has reopened, there's a backlog. That would have been the case whoever was in government.
Well, yes, but at the same time, the government has cut over 700 staff from the Passport Office over the last 5 years. And actually, although lots of people did put off applying for the renewal of their passports during COVID, the numbers that the Passport Office are processing at the moment are no different than the kinds of numbers they were just prior to COVID in 2019 and 2018. So capacity shouldn't have been a problem if the government was properly resourcing this service. And as we've revealed today from the Labour Party, tens of thousands of people are waiting more than 10 weeks to have their passport renewed, which is a direct contradiction to the Prime Minister's claim just a couple of weeks ago in Prime Minister's questions that everyone was having their passport processed in less than 6 weeks. So unfortunately, we are going to see the same kind of backlogs, the same kind of delays, alongside the enormous queues that so many passengers and travellers experienced at half-term and at Easter, insecurity at airports because of the lack of staff there, because of the huge number of vacancies. And whilst the government doesn't have within its gift to resolve all these issues single-handedly. Clearly, there is a burden on the airlines and the airports to take steps as well. The fact of the matter is that they're sitting back and they're missing in action, and they're not doing anywhere near enough in order to make sure that people, come the summertime, will be able to get on their holidays.
Well, they suggest that airports are taking on more bookings than they can handle. What does the government do about that if that is the case?
Well, look, the problem is that airlines and airports made far too many redundancies, frankly, during COVID, and they didn't avail themselves of the kind of furlough money that they could have, and that furlough money didn't come with the conditions that the trade unions were asking for at the time, that it be attached to job guarantees. And both the industry and government were warned that if you lose these high-skilled jobs like air traffic controllers, like security staff, like ground control staff, it's going to be very difficult to recruit them again. And this is exactly what we're seeing at the moment. Enormous vacancies, particularly in airports like Manchester. And that's the reason why people have been experiencing such queues, because they just don't have the staff to process either security or get the bags on and off the planes. So the government could be doing much more to convene the unions and the industry in order to address these chronic staff shortages and try and build a better and more stable industry for the future. Undeniably, as I say, the government doesn't have the whole solution within its gift, but they could and should be doing much more. And as we exposed recently, Grant Shapps didn't even bother meeting with the industry, with the airports or the airlines until weeks and weeks after we saw the initial chaos at Easter. And it feels very much that this government is far too distracted by their own political infighting and trying to prop up their weakened Prime Minister than they are interested in running the country and getting the bare basics right that people should expect.
Well, the government are criticising the Labour Party over rail strikes. Your party has a historic and enduring relationship with the trade union movement. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but you also exist to represent all workers, people in retail, nurses, teachers, cleaners, people who can't work from home on the days of those strikes, who are frankly going to be absolutely screwed by those strikes. With that in mind, shouldn't you condemn those strikes?
Well, firstly, let me say it is the right of all workers to organise and, of course, a fundamental human right to be able to withdraw your labour. We don't want to see these strikes go ahead. They are going to be enormously disruptive, particularly for the kind of workers that you've just described that rely on the rail, mostly in London and the South East in particular, to get into work. But they will be low-paid workers that need a functioning rail system. So we don't want to see this go ahead. But it is not inevitable that they do. And it is utterly risible for the government to be looking around and casting blame when they are in charge. They have it within their gift to pull the unions and the employers round the negotiating table at this moment in time and avoid this massively disruptive industrial action going ahead. The idea that the official opposition should be blamed for rail strikes and the most disruptive rail strike in modern history is laughable. And I think we saw that in many of the responses to Oliver Dowden's pathetic petition to the Labour Party last night. It is not inevitable that these strikes go ahead, and the government should be using every single minute between now and Monday night to try and stop them happening. Instead, what they're doing is pouring fuel on the fire, and it feels very much that they're the ones that want them to go ahead. It is incredibly irresponsible.
I want to just finally ask you about your leader, Keir Starmer. The most used word to describe him in focus groups with voters is boring. Whatever Keir Starmer's talents, exciting the electorate isn't one of them, is it?
Well, I think Keir Starmer is a very serious politician and he's very serious about running the country. He's run enormous organisations and he is passionate about changing this country for the better, about delivering a better economy and a better society for working people. Is he likely to create the same drama and distractions as Boris Johnson? No, absolutely not. And I think that's why people see him as a trustworthy, competent leader, full of integrity. And that was demonstrated completely by his statement about resigning if he is fined, which set him in stark contrast to Boris Johnson. And I think for all that people might think he's boring, the other side of the coin is that he is full of integrity and respected by large swathes of the population.
Louise Haigh, Shadow Transport Secretary, thank you for your time today. After the break, we will be remembering the Falklands War, 40 years after it ended. And I'll be speaking to Tan Dessie, Labour MP for Slough, on his parliamentary debate tomorrow on fire and rehire tactics. Before that, it is time for your weather.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, and the left fights the right, and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was, in fact, a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 40 years today since the Falklands War ended. Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is at the National Memorial in Staffordshire for us. Mark. Hi, Mark.
Gloria, good afternoon from the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. I'm standing in front of a Royal Naval Wasp helicopter, now retired, but which saw service with distinction during the Falklands War, of course, on those destroyers and frigates that were sent down as part of this huge naval task force to try to retake the islands. It was an incredible military endeavour, and I've been speaking to some of the Falkland Islanders who say they will be forever grateful for the sacrifice of those who paid with their lives, 255 British servicemen who died during that war, and the many, of course, who were injured. But they also ask the public to spare a thought for the islanders who suffered greatly during the 74 days of occupation as well, and for some that trauma lives on. This is what I've been finding.
And Mark, so we're just ready to, awaiting your package.
It was a huge gamble, dispatching a military task force 8,000 miles into the South Atlantic winter. But for Margaret Thatcher's government, recapturing the Falklands was a political imperative. After 74 for Argentinian control, the islands were finally liberated on the 14th of June 1982. But not before a heavy toll on both sides, with more than 250 British servicemen killed, almost 650 Argentinian losses, the deaths of 3 islanders, and a local population left deeply traumatised.
This was the kind of kit that really alarmed us because it was very heavy armour, and you can see that there's a turret there with at least a 0.5-inch machine gun, if not a cannon, and these were grinding through our streets.
Graham Bound was a young photojournalist in April 1982, running the local newspaper in Port Stanley, when he was suddenly faced with the scoop of a lifetime, an invading Argentinian army. Many of the images he captured during those months of conflict are being seen publicly for the first time, part of a fascinating exhibition at the Chatham Naval Dockyard. Images that of course document the military operation, but also the plight of a captive population caught in the middle of a violent struggle to retake the islands.
These Argentines are being rounded up by British troops. You can see, I think, Paras or Marines doing their best to round them up and at the same time getting these men to clear up a little bit. But the mess was unspeakable. This was one of our general stores here, which had been torched and was gone, but the smoke was still lingering. And when I look at these, I can almost still smell them. It was just a complete scene out of hell, frankly.
It was the day of the Vulcan bombing of Stanley Airfield that we heard HMS Hermes trying to get through to the Argentine High Command to offer terms of surrender.
Saul Pitaluga was a teenager at the time of the invasion when he and his father were captured by the Argentinians as they tried to relay a radio message from the British task force to the Argentinian command.
So long story short, they arrested my dad and took him into Stanley for some fairly rigorous questioning, and including having a gun held to his head and the mechanism being clicked to try and sort of extract more information.
By the time the Argentinians surrendered, along with the hundreds killed, the British had lost half a dozen ships and more than 30 aircraft.
4 decades on from the Falklands War, the lessons learned from that conflict have been used to help shape and improve the UK's military. Destroyers and frigates are now much better protected from air and missile strikes, and it's the reason why we now have 2 super carriers, 3 times bigger than the Falklands-era aircraft carriers, better able to protect the fleet.
As the sacrifices in this pivotal military campaign are remembered, Graham Bound is anxious that the islanders, who also suffered, are not forgotten.
It's a thing quite near to my heart because I actually think that everybody just had to pick themselves up and carry on. I look at these guys, both of whom are now gone, and I'm quite proud of them, and I think they did a really good job. I wish they weren't perhaps a little bit forgotten.
Mark White reporting for us there. Now, since the pandemic, we've seen the increasing use of fire and rehire tactics. Labour MP Tander C has a debate in the House of Commons tomorrow calling for it to be outlawed. And he joins me now, the Labour MP for Slough. Hi there, good to see you, Tan. The government are acting on this. At the end of March, in light of the P&O ferries debacle, they introduced a new statutory code of practice which details how businesses must hold fair, transparent and meaningful consultations on proposed changes to employment terms. They're doing it.
Look, Gloria, first of all, I think if we look back at the history of this, in June 2021, there was a report from ACAS commissioned by the government, which was published, and the government promised there would be guidance to bolster that guidance, action would be taken. only guidance, not actual legislation. And then they kicked that into the long grass. It was only until March 2022 when we had the scandalous behaviour of P&O ferries who trampled on workers' rights and their fire and rehire tactics that the government kicked back into gear, and then they promised that there would be further action. We are still waiting. That's where there is, because they have now said that they will legislate as and when parliamentary time allows. Well, there is parliamentary time. Why don't we do it today? Why not tomorrow? Let's get on with it. And let's not forget, Gloria, that the government promised back in 2019 in the Queen's speech that they would have an employment bill. Well, 3 years later, we are still waiting. Ministers have said on at least 20 different occasions that there will be an employment bill. So the government can't keep saying that, oh, look, the Conservatives are the party of the workers, and then give them mere platitudes, meaningless platitudes and warm words, and not taking any action. We can't just clap key workers. We need to be actually giving them decent jobs, decent wages, and decent terms and conditions.
How widespread is this tactic of fire and rehire? Do you have cases in your own constituency, for example?
Yes, Gloria, look, we've had issues in Slough. We are very much an airport town, very, very close to Heathrow Airport. So when the pandemic struck and the aviation sector was decimated, thousands upon thousands of hard-working individuals, my Slough constituents, were affected. And there were certain companies that were engaged in unscrupulous practices, which meant that they would try to fire and then rehire those individuals, whether it was in the catering sector, also amongst some of the airlines. And we know what happened with British Airways, also British Gas, Centrica, as it's known. And it's also very, very disappointing that those companies are using British in their name, and yet they are going against those very core great British values. So we cannot allow that to happen. And that's why the likes of me were so worked up. And that's why, when we campaigned against that, you may remember actually, Gloria, we had a discussion earlier when I led and secured a debate on the Taylor Review. So whether it was that, whether it's now, I've managed to secure a debate this week, again on fire and rehire, we need to apply the pressure on the government. And after what's happened with many of my constituents, even with the Taylor Review, now what happened there? Back in 2017, that was published, July 2017. So that's almost five years ago. There were 53 recommendations which came from the Taylor Review on modern working practices. The government actually accepted 51 of those recommendations. But yet, lo and behold, they have only legislated on 7 of them. 7, which is absolutely ridiculous. That's no way to be giving a fair deal to workers. And even on fire and rehire, there were all of these warm words, and yet there has still not been any action on it. You will remember, Gloria, that Barry Gardiner, he led on a bill, Barry's bill on this. The government actually filibustered that bill. Okay. They did not allow that to happen, and there was a 3-line whip at its second reading. But I'm glad to say that Lord Woodley, that he has now introduced a fire and rehire bill in the House of Lords.
Tan will be watching with interest that debate tomorrow. Thanks for your time today, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you. After the break, we have a Real Me interview with the West Midlands Mayor, the Conservative Andy Street, where he opens up about not realising he was gay until he was 30. Lots more too. But first, it's the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon, it's 12:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Scotland's First Minister says there's an indisputable mandate for a second referendum on Scotland's independence from the United Kingdom. Speaking in Edinburgh, Nicola Sturgeon said it would allow for a wealthier, fairer and more resilient nation. She says people in Scotland are suffering from many implications of a Brexit they did not vote for. Scotland previously held a referendum in 2014 on the issue. 55% of the country voted against independence. The Foreign Secretary says the EU has absolutely no reason to retaliate against government plans to override the Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU's threatened legal action if the changes go ahead. And Ireland's Foreign Affairs Minister, Simon Coveney, warned it could destabilise peace in Northern Ireland. The government claims the new rules will make it easier for goods to travel there from Great Britain. The number of UK workers on payroll rose by 90,000 between April and May to 29.6 million. But wages have fallen by 4.5%. That's the biggest drop in more than 2 decades. Data from the ONS shows that while employment is rising, it remains below pre-pandemic levels. Thousands more railway workers are to be balloted for industrial action, threatening to cause even more travel disruption for passengers this summer. The Transport Salaried Staffs Association has served notice to ballot more than 6,000 staff at Network Rail. It's in a dispute over pay, conditions and job security, the same dispute that's behind the RMT and ASLEF national rail strikes planned for later this month and July. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Shortly, we'll be back to Gloria for the briefing.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, my real meat interview today is with Andy Street, the Conservative Mayor for the West Midlands and the former boss of John Lewis. Openly gay, he says he didn't realise until he was about 30, doesn't see himself as a trailblazer. Andy Street, thank you for joining me. You were Managing Director of John Lewis from 2007 to 2016.
Yeah.
Brilliant job. What's the biggest change you delivered while at John Lewis?
Well, Gloria, it's great to be here, and thanks for starting with something that was very, very dear to me for all those years. I guess, you know, you talk about one change. It wasn't that. The thing I was proudest of, which might be the other way of taking your question, was that just after I left, so I never achieved it, my successor did, John Lewis was actually voted the most trusted brand in Britain in any sector at all. And that came from years and years of endeavour, and you're probably interested to know the BBC were always number one, and I could never get that top slot. I walked away and they got top slot. So I guess that was the thing. You thought if you can get to be the most trusted brand in anything, something's got to have gone okay.
And they have an interesting staff model, don't they? Employee model. Just tell us about that and whether it is something that other businesses should emulate.
Really interesting question. Should others do it? So the story is John Lewis, of course, has to compete with traditional businesses owned by the shareholders, profits for the shareholders. But the success of John Lewis is all shared with its employees. The employees are the owners. You could say it's the biggest sort of workers' cooperative in Britain. And when I was sort of being recruited, I thought, this business is slightly different to others. It's sort of, and it piqued my interest. And the truth is, for 30 years, I wanted to be part of this experiment. We always said it was an experiment. Could we better those other businesses by doing things differently? And I always said to my team, if you get bored of that challenge, it's time to move on. So yeah, I love the fact that we were taking on those big conventional businesses, doing it in a completely different way. And we always said the single purpose of John Lewis is the happiness of their members. So a very, very different purpose to most businesses.
What could other businesses learn from that model?
Well, people say, could it be the standard web business? And you might remember the 2010 general election, a time interesting in your political history, of course. And Nick Clegg was talking there about the John Lewis model being the solution to what they saw then as rampant capitalism. And there was something in it actually about a fairer way of doing business, a different way of sharing rewards. And I was delighted when that model gained such currency. But you know, it was naive to think that everyone could become a John Lewis. That's just not so. We weren't going to get huge successful PLCs suddenly pass over. But there are lots and lots of businesses structured like John Lewis, but they tend to be really small, probably two or three person businesses, and they don't grow. And the magic of John Lewis was, of course, we grew into a huge business by letting the executives get on and lead it. But we always knew we were accountable to our employees. We were doing it all for them.
So you have this brilliant job. You're speaking very passionately about it. You jack it in.
Yeah, spot on.
To be West Midlands Mayor.
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
And remember, people said, there's no chance of you winning that election. People thought I was stark, staring mad to walk away from it. But there were push and pull factors. The first thing, I'd been CEO, you'd probably say, of John Lewis for 10 years nearly. And that's a long time. Most CEOs last about 2.5 years. Yeah. And I just thought very genuinely, I've done that, and there are lots of people who could do this better than me now. So I was ready to move on. But the real pull factor was David Cameron, George Osborne, then PM and Chancellor, was setting up this experiment, really, another experiment in a different way of leadership in our country, to have mayors for big places, the whole of the West Midlands, about 4 million people in population, same in Greater Manchester, same in Merseyside, same in South Yorkshire, for example, big regional places, and saying there'll be an individual who is directly elected, directly accountable. And I thought, perhaps immodestly, I can make a difference. I'd always cared for my home city, Birmingham, and I thought we could do better. And so I thought, yeah, let's have a go at this. But as I say, no one gave me any chance of winning.
What's the party that you represent is the party of government. You must have had a few rows along the way because you're fighting for your people.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
But central government may not want to deliver what you want them to deliver.
You are spot on. So, you know, it's much to my regret, in a sense, that you have to stand as a party candidate, because these mayoral jobs, and I think you've seen this in the individuals who've done it around the country, and indeed when Boris was Mayor of London, it is about an individual doing a job. And I think the electorate get that, actually. But you do have to stand for a party. I'm a proud Conservative, always have been, so I was happy to do it. But right at the beginning, you talk about rows. It wasn't quite a row, but I was very clear with Theresa May, who was then the PM, we will do this our way. This campaign will be run entirely from Birmingham, not by central office, and we were going to be that little bit independent. And I've always thought in the last 5 years, my first loyalty is to the people of the West Midlands, and on occasions you have to stand up to government and say, no, that's not the best thing in our interest. Famously, during the sort of tearing thing in lockdown, you had to get out there and say, this system, this lack of support for the higher tiers isn't right. So yeah, you've got to be careful. You're Conservative, yeah, but your loyalty is to the people of the West Midlands.
And when you were elected, you became the first openly gay Metro Mayor in Britain. You're a trailblazer. Do you feel like one?
No, there were only 8 of us, so it wasn't a huge group to be a trailblazer amongst. But I was very clear, standing in a role like that, people needed to know who you were, what your values were, what makes you tick. So the fact that I was gay needed to be on the public record. So I just did it. It makes absolutely no difference to how I do my job, but people needed to know. And that was all it was. And I didn't sort of feel I was a trailblazer in any way. It's probably 30 years too late for any of that.
I read that you didn't realise you were gay until you were about 30.
Yeah, that's about right, yeah.
Can you expand on that? It struck me when I read it. I was surprised.
Well, that's just my story. That I know for many people, they know when they're 5 or 6, some people say much sooner, but for me, it was much later in life, really. And I suspect, if I'm very honest, it was to do with all the normative pressures that there are as you're growing up and the things you just expect to do. But through my late 20s, I just thought, no, this isn't me. And so things changed.
And coming out was a happy experience.
Yeah, I've been very pleased that I've been very honest with people. And do you know what? Apart from in interviews like this, no one ever mentions it in my daily life. And this is, I think, a huge credit to modern Britain. It is utterly irrelevant.
You're close to Michael Fabricant MP.
Yeah.
How would you describe the relationship, the friendship?
Well, friendship is the right word. I would probably say he's my best friend. We've been friends for about 30 years, as I think he told you on this programme, actually. So about 30 years. We don't live together, to be really clear about it, but we are very close, and I know he will always be there for me and me for him, and we do lots of things together. And as he's said many times, we have this shared holiday home in West Wales where we both enjoy it, sometimes together, sometimes with respective friends. And if you're not, perhaps expand a wee bit, if you're not married with kids, you do need a different group of intense friends to provide that sort of support network. And Michael has been an intense friend for many, many years.
Who leaves the most mess when they've stayed there?
Him. No question about it.
Would you like to be a Member of Parliament?
A Member of Parliament. So, interesting question, because I've been, well, I think this, because it makes you, it's not the first time I've been asked that. I've been asked it probably for many years, because what we didn't say in the early life, I studied PPE, the politician's degree at Oxford, how predictable. And so many of my contemporaries then went into politics in different, whether they were an MP or maybe a political commentator or something. And I see some of them now leading the way. And so many people thought I might do that. I was chairman of the Conservative Association at Oxford, but I didn't want to, and I never want to. And all the time I was in John O's, people kept saying to me, come on, Andy, get on with what you really want to do. And who knows, I might never have been selected. I was probably too stroppy to be selected, but I never wanted to. But when this political job came up, which is different, I jumped at it, as we said earlier, and I'm still very pleased that this is the political role I want to do. Because to be honest, this is, you've got executive power, you're responsible for things, you feel, I hope this doesn't sound too corny, but, running John O'Shea, you used to look at the results every year and think, how have we done? It's the same in this job. I look at the outcomes for people in the West Midlands, whether people are getting better qualifications, whether they're getting better jobs, whether incomes are going up. I feel some responsibility for it. So I like that sort of sense of ownership of it. And that's unique to this job. It's not quite the same as an MP when you're part of a much bigger team.
You said that you did the politician's degree, the PPE at Oxford, and you were chair of the Conservative Association at Oxford. Any famous peers?
Oh, well, Boris was a bit younger than me, but he was there, and he was involved in the union famously, which I wasn't involved in. People of my background were more were less confident, I suppose, for that. And then a number. I tell you, one very famous peer, and he's a person who loves his politics but was never an MP, and that's Nick Robinson, of course, the voice of the Today programme. He and I were close friends at university. I've kept in touch with him since. A number of other people have become MPs from my immediate group, Jane Ellison, Richard Fuller. So all sorts of people who were in our group have gone on to that. But you know what? I always like to think I've done things slightly differently.
You mentioned your background, and you said that you weren't involved in the union because of your background. What do you mean by that?
Well, quite simply that I think looking back at how you needed to be for that when you were 19, 20 or so, you had to have a degree of self-confidence that, if I'm honest, I could not have aspired to when I was that age. Maybe wrong to say it was purely background, but I think there probably is something there if you come from a very normal, average Birmingham family. You probably aren't born with that sort of self-confidence to step into that. And I think that's right. I was happier with my piece in a rather more what you might call a more conventional, more grammar school background type approach to life. Having said that, people now say, well, where do you find your bloody confidence from? And I do believe you can learn these things through life, actually. So I've learned a lot.
give us a top tip on how we can be, how you can learn to be confident. Because I recognise, I relate to some of the things that you're saying about the Oxford Union. I used to get invited as an MP to debate, and I just thought, gosh, I'm not going down there. No way. So to give me a tip.
Well, you can train yourself in public speaking. I would have been terrified when I was 18 or so to do that. But you can, I mean, this is going to sound bizarre, but I had an executive coach when I became MD of John Lewis, actually, because it's not dissimilar. If you're fronting a company that it's in the public domain, I say most trusted company in Britain, everyone's got an opinion on John Lewis. Everybody, literally, just like if you're running a bank or running a football club, it's a public-facing organisation. You're the representative of it. You got to get it out there and promote it. So I did do training for it, and it literally, to some extent, involved lying on the floor and learning to breathe properly as though you're an actor. Might sound completely mad.
Really?
It involved literally learning how to present your annual accounts in an engaging way. So I am a great believer that you can be trained in some of the skills needed to be a front man, whether it be in business, in politics, or indeed probably if you're a football manager or anything else, you can learn some of these things that are required.
Interesting. Final question. Probably the most political current question. We're recording this the morning after Boris Johnson has won his vote of no confidence, albeit more narrowly than some expected. Your fortunes, it doesn't matter how brilliant you are, every mayor's fortune, every local MP's fortunes, it affects them. What's happening at the national level, the state of that national party. What do you say to those who caused last night?
Well, interesting question is who's caused it. So it depends a bit what you mean. But I would say this to both sides of the debate last night, actually. Of course, what's happened in terms of number 10, Partygate, is utterly wrong. Absolutely no question about it. It has to be condemned. It's a huge surprise that it happened, and it is just completely unintelligible from someone looking on afar. But you come to the question about whether what you might call regime change is in the interests of the people you represent. And my job, as I said earlier, is to think about the interests of citizens in the West Midlands. We've had a torrid time through COVID. We're slowly rebuilding. Some of the things the government are doing are really, really important to our futures. And so I would say, think about those things. Think about the delivery of HS2, of levelling up, of the devolution deal that we're working on, investment in new jobs and skills and new industries. Those are the things that matter. Actually, is the government going to deliver on those promises? So to all Conservative MPs, I would say that's what I and my citizens are actually really, really wanting to see.
Well, your chances at the next election, are you going to stand again?
I hope so. It all depends on the will of Conservative members across the West Midlands. But as it stands at the moment, yes. And let's be honest about it. It's going to be more difficult for a Conservative candidate. But I hope, and you can see this in mayoral results actually across the country, I hope my record, the way I've gone about this job, the way I've personally demonstrated my values in how I've done it, that will win through whatever the national situation.
Do you hope Boris Johnson will be the leader at the time of the next election?
That is not down to me. That is actually down to MPs and then the members of the party. What I know is I will stand on my record.
Andy Street, our first mayoral interview. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You can watch all my Real Me interviews on our YouTube channel, or of course via our app, or listen to the podcasts. Just search GB News wherever you get your podcasts. Now, we're all feeling the squeeze as prices soar. Today, the Office for National Statistics has said that regular pay packets are falling at their fastest rate for 10 years when you take prices into account. Joining me now is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Just drill down into those Office of National Statistics figures for us. What does it mean?
Well, we all know, Gloria, that inflation is high. The retail price index is 9% higher in April than the year before. And that means that everything's more expensive in the shops. Consumer spending power is falling. and average wages, excluding bonuses, in real terms fell around 3 or 4% on the latest numbers. That means living standards are falling. That's why we're seeing the economy slowing. And then business invest less because they think consumers have got less money to spend. This is how inflation turns into a broader economic slowdown, as we've been discussing here on GB News for many, many months. And that's why there's more industrial action happening. In my show On the Money in the next hour, I'll be talking to the RMT, the main transport union in this country. They're, of course, staging 3 separate one-day strikes across the national rail network next week. There'll be lots of disruption. I'll be talking to them about the claims, the changes that they want to make. And this is how, when you get these real wage falls, real wages being the actual wage you get minus the rate of inflation, then you start to get a lot more political discontent, a lot more unrest. That's a big reason why the government is under so much pressure with this cost of living crisis. It's not just those supply chain issues, higher food prices because of the war in Ukraine and all the rest of it. It's because wages aren't keeping up with those rising prices. And that's when millions and millions of ordinary households, many of whom were previously comfortably off, really start to feel the squeeze.
What could or should they do? What's the recommendations coming at them if they want to help us and to help the economic recovery?
Well, the whole of the economics profession and much of the Conservative Party are in a quandary, aren't they? Because on the one hand, you could borrow more, you could crank up the Bank of England's printing presses again, so-called quantitative easing, and just give more money to people to spend. That's what the government could do. Or, as another part of the Conservative Party wants to see, just let people keep more of their money in the first place. Cut taxes. Now, we know that taxes actually rose in April, didn't they? Those national insurance rises for both employers and employees. So some Conservatives didn't want those to happen. A lot of ordinary people didn't want those wage rises to happen. The government would counter that, in July we're going to raise the national insurance threshold. What does that mean? It means that you earn more money before you start paying national insurance. There's a lot of political smoke and mirrors going on here. For my money, I don't think the government, I don't think Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have got the kind of ideological courage to cut taxes into the face of an economic slowdown, though a lot of their backbenchers wish that they would. I think we are going to see more government borrowing. I think we are going to see more Bank of England printing press action. And that's why, Gloria, the pound is falling, because if there are more pounds around, they're worth less, if you like.
Right.
And as the pound falls, we're seeing that on financial markets now over recent days, all inputs get more expensive, all imports get more expensive, and that pushes up inflation. Whoever said economics was easy? Not me.
No, and happy 1-year anniversary. We stood here, didn't we? We sat here. In fact, we sat over there on the sofa a year ago today.
And did our first show on GB News.
Yeah, and made good friendships. So thank you for your analysis and your friendship. You have been watching or listening to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Thank you, as ever, for your company today and over the last year. As you may know, we've just celebrated our first year in air, and this morning we got a happy birthday message from the Prime Minister himself. He said, "Happy birthday. A year in, hired great talent, presented new perspectives and served new audiences." Up next, it's On the Money, my colleague and friend Liam Halligan. But first, it is time for your wonderful weather forecast.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin. Plenty of sunny weather to come over the next few days, actually. It's a bit warmer today and the temperatures will continue to tick up through the rest of this week. Hot for most of us by Friday. All thanks to an area of high pressure, which is dominating, but it isn't completely in control. Around it, weather fronts continue to topple in towards western parts of Scotland. So it's not going to be too sunny here. The Highlands, the Western Isles and Shetland seeing cloud and outbreaks of rain through the rest of today. Small chance of a shower over the Grampians further east across Scotland as well. But for most places, it's dry. Plenty of sunshine across the south. Always a bit more